In this video, you'll hear real stories from private detectives about what their work is actually like. No movie glamour and no flashy chases, just surveillance, patience, and decisions that have to be made when no one is watching. You'll learn how each case begins, what mistakes people make when they try to hide the truth, and why in this line of work, the most important skill is noticing what everyone else misses. If you're drawn to mysteries, human motives, and the way a puzzle comes together from scattered pieces, stay with us. These are stories about searching, about doubt, and about a truth that's almost always more complicated than it seems. Since you asked so nicely, this case, so many weird things happened while we worked it, but this incident stands out. We were trying to gather evidence that a married man was regularly going out to cruising sites for gay hookups. Our client, his wife, had seen texts from other men making references, but needed something more concrete as she was planning to divorce him and wanted this information as ammunition. This particular night, as we pulled onto the site to find a quiet place to park and make observations, we saw a vehicle with a gentleman sat in a reclined position, looking bored. Thinking he was just another customer, we paid little attention, simply writing down the car registration for our records. There was very little going on that night, and we actually decided to check out a few other local hotspots to see if our subject was at any of them. Coming up dry, we went back to the original site, and as we drove past their car, spotted someone else in the car, which my partner was convinced was a woman. Time passed, and we decided to call it quits for the day. As we drove off, the car came to life and began to follow us. My partner executed some unusual driving maneuvers to try and shake them off, but they stayed with us. We decided to divert to the local hospital to see if they would follow and, if need be, confront our stalkers, thinking a public place would be a deterrent against trying anything violent and the best place to be if things got physical. We parked, and our pursuers did the same, all but leaping out of their cars to pin us in before we could unfasten our seatbelts. My partner casually winds his window down and says firmly but politely, "Can I help you?" The man, who has the biggest shit-eating grin on his face, says, "We're undercover police officers looking into suspicious activity in the area." Unfazed, my partner and I pull out our ID and say, "Well, we're private investigators on a case." We inform the local constabulary we would be operating in the area out of courtesy. Here is the log number for the call. He and his companions, who was a woman and a foxy one at that, faces just fell. Clearly, they'd been sat there for hours, hoping we were guilty of something and could relieve their boredom. They confirmed our stories, sheepishly apologized, and got back into their car to resume their watch. The saddest case we had was a stunning 26-year-old woman whose 60-ish-year-old accountant husband was suspected of sleeping with his secretary, who looked like she had fallen out of the ugly tree and hit every branch on the way down. The client hired us to follow him on a night he was working late. Sure enough, he and the slutty secretary left the office on time and went to a bar together. After a few drinks, they retired to her car, and we got some pretty damning footage of them shagging in the back seat. Classy. We gave the footage and report to the client, who promptly burst into tears and paid the $1,800 or so invoice. The saddest part of the story is she came back 4 times. Each time he was caught literally with his pants down. At the slutty secretary's house, shagging in the car, shagging in the office with the blinds open in the middle of the day. You name it. After about $15K worth of invoices, we actually sat down with her and explained we were going to stop taking her work. It was just cruel to keep taking her money to show her footage of her husband banging his ugly-ass bimbo over and over and over. We never saw her again. I hope she took him for all he was worth. The strangest case the firm I worked for handled was towards the end of last year. The job was given to us by another agency. It was for that evening, an important detail as it meant we did not have time to screen the job and get all the details we would normally ask for. And the brief was that the client suspected her husband was having an affair with a coworker. He worked at a hotel in a capacity I don't recall. We sent 2 agents to monitor him at work, requiring several hours of effort, all the while putting more on the expenses tab as the team had to keep buying drinks to avoid raising suspicion. The client would phone for updates every 20 minutes, despite being told not to make contact, and that a full report would be issued in short order. The agents managed to tail the individual until the end of his shift, seeing nothing unusual, and discreetly followed him home, deciding to give the client a ring and confirm the address he had come to was his house and not the coworker he was allegedly cheating with. The client evaded the question and demanded the team go back to the hotel. Confused and irritated, the agents went back and were greeted by the sight of the client scrambling out of a bush, binoculars in hand, directly opposite the hotel, where, judging from the state of her clothes, she had seemingly been most of the evening. Furious, the agents questioned her, and it transpired the man they had been watching wasn't her husband, but rather someone she had involved with casually who was no longer returning her calls. Stern words were had, and management even talked about bringing in police, and we blacklisted her. She did, however, pay promptly and in full. Many more stories, some funny, some strange, but that is definitely the weirdest. We did mostly disability fraud. Most PI work is insurance because it's consistent and easy to bill. It's basically professional doorknob watching. Show up to site around 4 a.m., sit there all day and see nothing. Take time-stamped photo or video every hour. Sit in car all day peeing in Gatorade bottles and watching movies. Go home, submit report that nothing happened and you saw nothing. Sometimes catch people claiming disability working out at a gym or cleaning gutters, basic normal stuff that people claiming disability shouldn't be able to do. Weirdest thing I ever saw was a municipal client that wanted surveillance on a dude suspected of violating a zoning ordinance by manufacturing fertilizer in his house. Never confirmed any of that, but that would be stinky if true. Sometimes you have to follow the subject in a vehicle, and that requires a crazy amount of traffic violations, mostly running red lights and speeding. Most contracts want you to break surveillance if you get noticed. You just switch cars and try again the next day. All things considered, awful job. Little career growth, crazy hours, inconsistent work. Licenses can be difficult to acquire, so mostly you work for a company that holds a license and never progress. You'll miss holidays and family events. Shit retirement. If you think you like that work, be a cop and then make detective. At least you get a pension. Former PI in several states, worked for the biggest names in the industry. My response is, Which one? The two 18-20-year-old M and F who decided to rob a restaurant. I watched on video a 17-yo kid who was lying on his stomach in the back of the restaurant get shot execution style. Also, they shot the boss. Both complied with the robbers who dropped money as they ran. We interviewed the girlfriend of one of the robbers. She said when she starts refusing to have sex with a guy, they run out and do crazy things. She had refused sex to her BF before this guy, and that guy was also in jail for murder. It's strange to watch someone bored at work just walking around. 12 minutes later, you're watching them die. Too many domestics to count. I hated domestics. There are too many ignorant people in the world. Interviewed a family who was so effed up. A kid wearing just diapers was going in the backyard, getting a drinking glass of dirt and taking it through the house. The whole time I was there. In the background, the TV was going, Jerry, Springer. I went undercover several times. Strange stories from that. Triple homicide in a restaurant. Killers got $600. One victim was 9 months pregnant. Her baby was buried in her arms. The two killers are now on death row. Shook me up for years. One of the perpetrators' moms helped them by trying to hide evidence. Some media tried to blame the pregnant girl because she was white. Listen to a phone conversation. A meth dealer's wife giving birth as he is running around town delivering dope. She and her friend are on the phone screaming at him to come to the hospital. I just gotta make one more drop. She's going into labor shrieking, "Motherfucker Jerry, get you fucking ass to this delivery room." On one case, I was hired to discover and document time theft and any other unauthorized activity on the overnight shifts at a company that refurbished commercial aircraft components. I found what I was looking for in pretty short order, shot lots of video and photos, and took copious notes, and noticed some other odd activity I couldn't immediately figure out. I took the evidence to the client. They were happy with the documentation of the time theft and some other small-time policy violation, but when we got to the video I shot of the other questionable activity, my client grew visibly alarmed, interrupted our meeting, and called his superiors while I sat there and waited. After 3 phone calls, I was asked to come back a few days later and present the evidence I had collected of the as yet uninterpreted questionable activity to some senior company personnel. At the follow-up meeting, I was a little taken aback. I was ushered into a large meeting room with a long table and about a dozen senior executives, including the CEO, the CFO, a representative of the company's third-party law firm, and a couple of third-party forensic accountants. I presented my evidence and was asked if I could install some clandestine surveillance equipment. I told them I could, so long as we operated 100% within the law. They described what they wanted to accomplish, and I designed a way to record video and audio. This was all pre-wireless, so I had to show up disguised as a pest control guy for a few days in the off hours to install everything. The surveillance went on for a couple of months. At the end of that time, we had amassed enough evidence to discover that the senior representative of the labor union on the shop floor was the common law husband of one of the bookkeepers in the executive offices. She had been spying on the execs and passing information to the shop steward during labor negotiations for several years. She, and another accounting employee, had also been manipulating the records to obfuscate the fact that a significant amount of new stock and used parts pilfered and stolen from their customers were being stolen by the shop employees and sold on the gray market via a network of contacts to foreign competitors. These parts were then installed in planes in some airlines, which I won't name, that had a rash of plane crashes during that time. Upshot was, several $1 million in ongoing embezzlement was brought to an end. 4 people went to prison. Several more lost their jobs. This investigation taught me a lot. I used these lessons in an investigation for another client in the same industry. That investigation proved to have some uncanny similarities to this one, and some wild differences, but I'll have to share that story another time. Been one for a long time. I gotta say that most cases I work on are pretty boring. The job is full of mild gotcha moments, but they're a product of long, lonely hours on surveillance just to get a guy shoveling some dirt while collecting injury compensation benefits. A PI's greatest tools in the universe are Google and a telephone. I can call and ask anyone anything under the guise of anything I want. I even call the people I'm investigating sometimes or correspond via email when I need answers or information. It's ridiculous the amount of information people volunteer about themselves after some good-natured banter. Also, I'm sure most of you know this trick, but you really can go anywhere with a clipboard, high-vis vest, and a hard hat. The best case I was part of involved a security guard my firm hired to do night watch on an electronics store. I was part of a small firm that, at the time, provided security guards and private investigators. One night we get a call from the guard. He'd had the shit kicked out of him, been tied to chair, escaped, and called the cops in the office to report a robbery at the store. 3 attackers managed to pry the back door open and subdue the guard and proceed to rob the place of about a $100K worth of shit. The guard told a compelling story and looked like shit. It took the police all of 2 days to track down the stolen shit. The thieves weren't being very careful when it came to offloading the goods. The thieves turned out to be the guard's brother and cousins, and it was our guard's brilliant idea for them to come and rob the place and make it look like an armed robbery. What a goddamn idiot. We still laugh about it. It must have been one of those thoughts that sounded brilliant and sophisticated in his own head, only to have the epiphany that it was moronic hit him with same Mack truck-like intensity a little later on. It was unusual to have such a dumb movie heist plot happen with people I worked with. Worked as a PI for about a year once when I was much younger. This wasn't a case I took, which will be obvious by the end why I didn't. We had an office on the ground floor of a building near the county courthouse, with a door that opened to the street. This meant we actually got a fair amount of foot traffic. If I had nothing going, I closed the office around 5 p.m. Around 4:45 p.m., a lady comes in asking all the usual questions. Are you really a PI? What cases do you take? How much do you charge? Yada, yada, yada. I spend 10 minutes going through all that. This lady seemed pretty wound up, which is not unusual. People don't come in looking for a PI when everything is great. Often it's because they are having one of the worst experiences of their lives and are desperate for help and haven't gotten it elsewhere. I ask her to tell me what brought her in today and be as detailed as possible. She tells me that someone stole her ideas and now she's being followed. I'm thinking, great, potential intellectual property case. I ask her to start from the beginning. What were these ideas? She starts telling me about here, last gynecological exam. I immediately stop her and ask her what this has to do with her ideas being stolen. She flips out. She begins screaming about how the doctor implanted a listening device inside her, and that's how they are stealing her ideas. I do my best not to react. She screams, "You don't believe me either, but I have proof." She runs out of the office and comes back a minute later with a large envelope. She pulls out X-rays of her pelvic region and shoves them in my face. See? Right there, that white spot on my ovary, that's the listening device. I agree that there is a small white dot, but tell her I'm not a doctor or an expert in listening devices and can't confirm that it is one. In reality, it didn't look like anything to me. I know it wasn't an electronic device of any kind. Let alone one that can capture you ideas and transmit them to vans that were following you around now. She goes on to tell me how the doctor was in on it, and they were stealing her ideas and making them into TV shows for Telemundo. This is the part where I tell you this middle-aged, blonde-haired, blue-eyed lady didn't speak a word of Spanish. I ask her about the vans that were following her. They were different colors and often different drivers, but they were definitely following her around, and that's how they were collecting her ideas. I'm looking for a polite way to tell this lady I won't be taking her case, but she won't let up and insists I do something about it. I finally catch a break. I tell her the retainer amount I would need to get started. She responds, "Well, I don't have that kind of money. When we win in court, you can have half the settlement. In the state I live in, only lawyers can work on contingency, meaning their payment is contingent on them winning the case. PIs and all people that might work for these lawyers still have to be paid no matter what." I tell the lady this. I thought she was about to explode. I tell her I can't break the law, but if she were to find a lawyer willing to take up her case, I could work for that lawyer as their PI. She calms down and says thanks for hearing her out. I say no problem. I ask her if there was a family member she could call or a doctor she did trust that she could see. She tells me she's not crazy and storms out. I felt horrible for her. She was obviously living in terror and needed professional help. This was the first time I encountered the seriously mentally ill. In retrospect, I should have called the police and tried to have them intervene. I regret that. I can look back now and cut myself some slack for being young and caught alone and off guard, but I still wish I would have done more. At the time, I just wanted to get her to leave peacefully. That was the most bizarre thing that ever happened to me during my time as a PI, but there were a couple of close runners-up.